The GOAT of Overwatch content creation himself, Seagull, has made a video talking about the triple support meta in Marvel Rivals. It already has a GOAT's problem. Let's listen to what he has to say and respond.
We've been seeing a surge of complaints about triple support team comps in Marvel Rivals. 2 supports are totally fine, but with 3 supports, it feels like this fun back and forth pace shooter instead turns into this waiting game where basically one or both teams are waiting up to 30 seconds out of a time of waiting for the enemy team to stop basically being invulnerable, which gets a bit absurd.
It does get absurd, and I think a main key takeaway here is a lot of higher tier players know that triple support isn't actually unbeatable nor that good, but it's very forgiving, and it just means that you're going to have a lot of extra tries, particularly in the neutral fight. It'd be hard for you to die in both phases of the fight, really, until they actually punish your mistakes, and it's harder to make mistakes with the triple support comp. However, it's also harder to make plays. So you can often like get stuck never winning a fight, but also never losing it. That's something that I notice about it. I don't think triple support's actually that good, but it is annoying to play up against, and you do have to counter it with the right picks. Otherwise, you might have a hard time. It really gobbles up bad play and bad picks.
Especially because it feels like it happens every team fight, or at least every other team fight. However, I don't think most triple support team comps are actually that good for most players. They're just really annoying. So I felt like it was a great time to chat about how to deal with it, as well as talk about other meta trends I've been seeing, like the rise of Thor and Moon Knight, as well as what I think will be super strong going into the future of Marvel Rivals as well.
Another thing to compare to here and think about is, like, if Luna ult duration or Cloak and Dagger ult duration drops, then the viability of Loki copying that ult also drops. It's part of the problem of Loki as a concept that can... Do you really want to copy a damage ult or support ult? So whatever is the best ults in the game, the better Loki gets, the better than duplicating another ult that's already OP gets as on top of that.
Before we dive into the nitty gritty, I first have to say that there is one triple support comp that I feel is unbeatable. I would in fact go as far to say that it is the pinnacle of Marvel Rival strategy.
Just look at this picture.
That it's
just slowly coming in to attack us. This is the comp we faced for like a year at the highest tiers of play. Holy moly, I can't believe that was actually a thing.
But hard to execute. If your team is losing and you check the scoreboard and as usual, somebody's feeding their brains out on your team, if you can convince them to swap to Rocket, you will have a 90% chance of winning the game. Rocket is the single most brain dead easy character in all of Marvel Rivals. Sometimes it's not about playing the best, it's about not being the worst.
So here's the thing that I like about the Marvel Rivals community right now. No one is going to jump on Seagull in order to make him into a bully on Rocket players. For some reason in the Overwatch community, if we said something like this about Moira players or something, there would be a cultural backlash on Twitter, and we would need to call a conference on how to protect the one tricks or something. Whereas Rocket is kind of the Moira of this game, like super vague and forgiving. I like playing him, actually. I think he's really fun. Like the mechanics of him is really fun, and he's a cool character, has a bunch of quips and whatever. I like the Guardians movies myself, so I kind of try to push back against the Rocket slander, but because he is super mobile, heals himself, and like a big percentage of his value comes from just hiding a respawn beacon off to the side, you can do a lot of the character without really needing to play very well at all. So with the open queue format, often it does devolve into getting bad players on super easy picks. So what he's saying here is almost like a ranked open queue phenomenon, where rather than the top meta strategy of playing the game well, you just need to play the game less bad. Because if you're trying to go for a character or pick or playstyle that can make mistakes, if you just get a bad player off that kind of pick onto something that hardly could ever make a mistake, then your whole team will have a much easier time.
I promise you, if your local feeder swaps to Rocket,
your local feeder,
the worst player in the lobby. I have won way too many games by doing this. Now let's actually talk triple support. What's interesting about triple support is that from sites that are tracking data such as Rivals Tracker, currently overall...
I just want to point out, like, Seagull is the nicest guy in the world, and that whole point is super savage. And I kind of wish he ratcheted up how savage that was, but he just sort of moves on to the next thing.
Triple support has a lower win rate than 2-2 comps in every MMR. So is it really a problem?
I wonder how many of those triple support comps are losing because people swap to it, right? So if you get a formation of your team that's not really working, I notice that people swap to triple support thinking they'll have an easier time. And so therefore, if just the team formation, if the 6 players you have is probably going to lose against their 6, and that's like, it's a weird cultural phenomenon, right? It's hard to know what to do with these stats sometimes. But from my bias, I think triple support is kind of easy to beat because it lacks punching power that a lot of the really OP damage ults have. So yes, if you all deathball together and play around your ults really well and nobody's ever out of position, okay, fine. But as soon as you start to make a mistake, then the enemy can gain tempo and then you might not ever set up or be able to frag back. Whereas the other types of comps in the game, they're more explosive in the plays they get to make. You know, like a Star-Lord ult out in the sky. Yes, maybe you Invisible Woman ult to save everybody perfectly, or one of your teammates decide, you know, your Rocket or whatever is your DPS that swapped to Rocket is off on the side trying to get an off angle or something, and he's just dead. So it's like, yes, this ult kind of wins, but they have tempo now, and no amount of you having these OP ults is going to matter because they'll be able to outweight it.
I think that players often get mixed up about if something is really good or if it's just really annoying. A perfect example of this is
I also think not just annoying, but easy to execute. It feels safe. You feel like you're not making a mistake. But the problem is if you don't ever gain an advantage, that is a mistake. You know, if you don't have a play to funnel through, that's why I think as well, a lot of people pick vague triple support comps. He's kind of memeing about Rocket, but I think Rocket is a pretty bad character without the team up because you just sort of vaguely heal and run away forever. That's the playstyle you're adding. And then if you get a Cloak who just heal bots the front line, and then a Luna who doesn't really have a big play, just sort of sustains as well. She sustains and runs away. She's kind of a better version of Rocket in some ways, but not that much better. They're also kind of vague. All those characters are really vague. That comp right there has no backline punching power whatsoever. Maybe the Rocket ult kind of, but people really struggle to time Rocket ult for it to actually resolve a fight because they usually have responses, and there's ways you can get the Rocket ult to work, but it's harder to do than some of the other characters that press Q and everything explodes.
Hawkeye last season. Was he OP? Doesn't matter. People really hate
Doesn't
being
matter.
one shot across the map by random headshots, so the entire player base came together to ban that fucker every game. But if you check his official win rate that the Zebs posted last season, Hawkeye statistically was under a 50% win rate for most players, but he got nerfed.
I've been watching Seagull's content a lot recently, and I swear he's really on this Hawkeye propaganda train because he wants to be able to play him. So he's trying to get everybody to like think Hawkeye's bad. But he is making a good point here.
Why? Because the goal of balancing a game isn't to make it more perfectly balanced towards this magical 50% win rate, but rather to make the game more fun.
Hold on a second. You mean in this game? That wasn't the goal in that other game. That was the problem with that other game. The other game...
And I feel like triple support falls into a similar category. No one wants to play versus a triple support backline who makes their team basically invulnerable for over 30 seconds. It's just exhausting and tedious. The worst part is everybody just sits there running in circles trying to charge their own ults as fast as possible because there's nothing to do but stare at each other. So the moment all the support ults finally come to an end, everyone else in the game just has their ults immediately. So not only does it slow down the game, but it also speeds up ult generation for everybody else, which means this game that we're playing,
because basically what ends up happening is they sustain, you sustain. If nobody has the right burst ultimate in order to burst through any of it, you both sort of stay in, and then the people that don't have ult right now will be gaining ult in that infinite sustain, and then they'll execute that. It's just a big circle. I mean, this is the GOAT's meta in a nutshell for Overwatch fans.
Already revolves around trading ultimates with the enemy, becomes even more ult-centric than it should be, which in my mind reduces the fun gameplay a little bit too much down to almost like this pseudo rock, paper, scissors style gameplay, rather than the core fundamentals. Now, thankfully, there are counters for the average gamer. The first is Moon Knight. Our boy Moon Knight has an ult that is apparently bugged and is doing double damage according to
I didn't know
Reddit,
this.
Which is
This is
also
key information.
with another bug where if you have really high FPS, his ult also does more damage, which is kind of a good thing because, man, last season he was actually really bad. The most Moon Knight used
The funny thing is, Moon Knight is still not a great character. He'll do nothing the whole game, but needs to get 3 to 5 kills per ult, and then he'll have like a positive KD. That's what I noticed about Moon Knight.
Was hold left click at the enemy front line and do the enemy supports a favor by building their ults faster. And then Moon Knight would build his ult, and then he'd cast it. It would do nothing, and he would die. But now the reverse is true. If the supports pop ult, it builds the Moon Knight's ult, and then he just one-shots everyone on the server. It does a pretty good job of keeping all these defensive ults in check.
I hear this, and I think some people justify Moon Knight's power this way. Marvel Rivals is very close to it going over the edge for multi-support to be the best comp. We're just barely not there, and part of it's due to this broken hero that's bugged, but you don't want that kind of formulaic gameplay where nothing dies until the right character gets the one play that matters, and then they look at you and they win, and it just really dumbs down the game. So this is kind of why a lot of people thought that the Season 1 balance patch was worse than Season 0, because Season 0, while the broken things were snipers or long-range characters, I try to warn you guys, never complain when high skill expression heroes are at the top, because what ends up happening is undoubtedly then the sustain aspects of the game or whatever's easier starts to creep up. So let's not try to panic if Psylocke and Hela are dominating the game somewhat, to some degree. To some degree, certain skill-based heroes I would prefer if they were top tier competitive, because at this point I kind of feel like Hela is a little bit useless in a way. Like if you don't two-tap something, you're just constantly reloading and the enemy's constantly healing, and you never really gain an advantage with that character. You have to be like super precise to like bink bink something. If anything, like Black Widow might be a little bit more viable. That's like a hot take, but you can damage amp the Black Widow and snipe something and actually get something out of that backliner character. Overall, anyway, those are all mid-tier picks. There's much better picks above all of them.
Especially if you have something like a Groot to have that nice wombo combo every other team fight. However, it's also honestly kind of obnoxious to play against because all it is a point and click. There's not much counterplay. If he looks at you and casts his ult, you're basically a goner and there's nothing you can do about it.
Maybe you have a cooldown or something that can escape it, but even then, it's just so much damage with it being bugged.
I'm curious if they intend on nerfing the damage of his ult, or maybe they'll give it like a little wind up, kind of like Storm has, where the circle appears a little bit before it does damage by like half a second.
Like, look at this, just raining down from the sky.
The triple support as a solo queuer, though, is really Thor. Thor is an incredibly unique tank because he is the only tank in the game that can burst through heals at mid-range without ulting.
I also think like his movement flexibility allows him to play positions that the multi-support comp kind of can't contest off angles very well. The things that do that, the thing that stops Thor is certain flanker picks that are going to be able to space off of him, because Thor, while he does have his transform ability that's going to DPS dump, if you're a character that can dodge that with mobility, there's lots of DPS characters that do this, but if you could do that and like poke him, then you'll be able to contest him as he takes flank angles. But the triple support comp kind of needs to stay together. So what Thor can do is set up these like pincer attacks and backline dives and actually isolate one of these squishies, dump into them, and they often don't have enough damage in order to poke out his health points. Whereas some of the damage characters that exist, you would need them in order to really have the punching power to punish a Thor. And if you try to do that with some of the DPS picks, then they might have enough damage to stop you because your health points are so much lower, and some of their burst damage isn't as high as Thor's. Like Thor's is among the best.
The only other tank that comes close is probably Strange with a fully powered E, but that's also only
I think he's forgetting Groot's damage when you combo them together is great. However, Groot has to fight the front line. It's harder for him to get his walls into the back line unless they're out of position.
Thor, on the other hand, can take space on off angles. He can flank. He can 1v1 basically anybody in the game. And if he gets to your back line with Awakening up, the DPS is so high that he has real kill pressure, and those supports will probably have to use cooldowns. And the crazy thing is, most of the time, he can also get out afterwards because he even has vertical mobility, so he can just reset or just go on another flank. And also on top of that, I used to think his ult was kind of a meme, but it's actually no joke. I watched Surefour queue to top 50 as Thor recently, and I picked up some of the basics. And apparently Thor has a combo where if he dashes into you, he drops his bubble. His bubble has a slow, but it's not set in the game. It's set on the website. And so the bubble slows you, and if he hits the ult after he bubbles you, you can't escape unless you have a mobility skill of some kind, which means Thor can force out support ults or get picks if the enemy team doesn't have an escape.
That and more there. Once they use the escapes, then you can use the ult above them to kind of finish and chase them down. So you don't move a lot once you're up in the ult, but definitely using the slow to combo and really like the amount of cooldowns you get just in that dive attack There's not a lot of characters in the game that can go that aggressive and stay in a position and dump everything they have and still come out on top. Like, a lot of characters need to do that and get out because they're not going to confirm the kill. Thor is pretty unique in that way.
Outside of his ult, he's really, really good. And suddenly in his ult, he can get almost guaranteed picks. You're looking at a character that is essentially one of the hardest carries in the game for most
Yeah, this
players.
Mantis is screwed in the
Honestly,
corner.
He's one of my favorite characters now. If you're looking for a new character to climb ranked with, he's definitely at the top of my list, especially because he's not super hard to learn. All it is really positioning and learning how to bully people via those flanks. And the hardest part is learning how to aim those awakening shots. His only downsides are, well, one, he's not supposed to be used as a solo tank, but you probably shouldn't be solo tanking with him anyway.
The solo tank concept as Thor, don't frontline. Don't expect to ever frontline. You're always going to play the backline regardless of what your comp is, so you just don't have a frontline if it's solo tank Thor. But in some cases, that might be okay if you're just straight up deathmatching. And I will say as well, like, I think Thor's cooldown rotation is super simplistic, so he's actually not much more complicated than Venom. Like, Venom gets a lot of flack for being a super easy character, but Thor really, it's super obvious how you should always use your cooldowns, but it's very mechanical and fragtastic. You know, it's not that deep. You know, the things you want to target and how you're going to rotate your cooldowns is always the same. It doesn't have a lot of nuance, but very fun character with really high stats to be able to do some work out there. I will say as well, another added thing that I don't think he mentions is Thor adds crowd control, and in the multi-support or even just high healing output type meta, another character that plays the crowd control game. So you got like Wolverine crowd controlling things, you can crowd control and also be kind of resistant to crowd control because you can get away, you heal yourself, but you get shields when you use your abilities, and you can go mobility. So them either having crowd control or your team also having more means that you're contributing into that big crowd control fight. So Thor, very good character right now.
Two, he's kind of squishy, but if you mostly like to pick him into triple support comps, it's not like they have a lot of damage, so that problem is solved.
Exactly.
I talked a bit about the counter triple support, and I did want to mention some of the support comps that I think are truly powerful.
Guys, should I leave the back wall like this? It's like bothering me, just like the empty space. I don't know what could have been there, but maybe we need a replacement right there.
Get into anything as a third support, and he's generally always good, especially if you're under Grandmaster. He's my number one pick as a third support. But in my opinion, the truly good triple support comps, especially high MMR, come in two flavors: Loki or Adam. If you're a Loki triple support comp, you're probably built around Loki plus Luna or Cloak in order to get that sweet 20 to 30 seconds straight of defensive ult coverage. Then you toss in like, I don't know, like a Mantis or Rocket, whatever you want, and it's probably fine. This is the most common comp on the ladder. But fortunately, I think it's usually not super strong because I swear half these Cloak and Dagger players are just complete feeders. Like the amount of Cloak and Dagger players I see without a microphone,
the flame
ult straight into Magneto's meatball, hoping that someone shields them, is mind-blowing.
Yeah, I have to agree. The Cloak players that I've seen spam their abilities so much without any thought. And I say this because I've VOD reviewed, like, where are our bubbles going? Where are our heal amp going? And they seem to just use it off cooldown, use their ult off cooldown without much thought. And that's pretty problematic especially if you're playing triple support, because you need to be thoughtful on how you use your resources to gain space. But because you can rank up quite a bit if you just spam all of your abilities on a character that makes the team not die, you will rank up doing that. Just putting your face into the keyboard repeatedly and just press the buttons as fast as you can, and the stats on this character are so forgiving that you'll do something. Rocket's a little bit of the same, similar as well. It's not the right way to play, I don't think. And I think as well, with the game being so new, a lot of easy play styles are cropping up to be quite reliable and forgiving, and that helps you win the game, but not necessarily master or have a dominant style of play. It's sort of a short-term noob traps type strategy. I think Cloak is very, very reliable, but also overrated. Like, if the community engaged differently, Cloak wouldn't look as good, but everybody wants the frontline brawl in these types of games without thinking too deeply, and Cloak is the queen of that. Actually, I'd say even better than Luna. That's like a controversial take, but over time, Cloak is way better than Luna. Luna is good if you have to have a CC disable and she can jump away and stuff, but the stats on Cloak means you probably aren't going to have to do that. And overall, over time, I think Cloak's ult is better than Luna's, honestly.
Super high MMR are also kind of just ult bots. They're just kind of existing, and then they wait to copy, Luna or Cloaked. And they're also not super great, but man, when everybody is, on their A game, the comp is crazy good. The other triple support comp that I think is crazy good, but you almost will never.
I also think Loki is not a hero I see played very well outside of the highest ranks because he's a very technical hero. His potential is pretty nuts. I'd say he's like low-key, like a sleeper carry pick because especially when the game is so ult-centered, you knowing which ult you should copy for a given fight and either to sustain or to carry. Like if the enemy has a storm, I've seen some teams with Loki get multiple storm ults and that's hard to beat, or multiple support ults. Definitely a carry pick right there.
Ever see on ladder is Adam Warlock plus Mantis plus Luna or Cloak. Essentially, you have triple self-res synergy with the team up of Adam, Star-Lord, Mantis, and then you throw in a second strong defensive ult, and now you have a really powerful team.
Us Overwatch players are ruining Marvel Rivals already because what he's describing here is having the most offensive-minded supports paired with one Giga Healer. That's what this combination does. So Mantis has the opportunity to use resources to damage, amp, or heal, right? So what that means is Mantis is a pseudo DPS, and then on top of that, Warlock, his healing is kind of bad and burst nature, and then he basically is just a backline or DPS when not doing those big cooldowns. Spirit Bond is basically like an ultimate in a way. That's how it feels to me with its long cooldown and its situational use. And his healing is kind of negligible. But Mantis heals herself on her abilities so she can kind of frontline DPS brawl that whole time. And your team maybe would be weak in either support ults because Mantis's ult isn't that good and you can outplay the Adam Warlock res in some ways. So you're weak in overall mid-fight healing and ultimates, but strong in damage with the support backline, and then you can offset that by putting in an actual like main healer with a big ult. And I think ultimately just Luna and Cloak, probably their ults are just over the top in my opinion, but what are you gonna do? The alternative is we swing back to like a sniper meta or a flanker meta. We already know the script of how balancing this type of game is going to work. Just ban it.
Adam Warlock plus Mantis plus Luna or Cloak. Essentially, you have triple self-res synergy with the team up of Adam, Star-Lord, Mantis, and then you throw in a second strong defensive ult, and now you have a really powerful team. And it's super strong because Star-Lord's one of the best DPS, and you really can't go wrong with 3 players on your team being able to res themselves in case anyone gets picked by an ult or anything. And it's one of my favorite team comps because I think Adam Warlock is actually super underrated as a character. Soul Bond's crazy, and he has insane burst heals, but he's so weak as, you know, that traditional second support. But a third support with Adam plus Mantis, right? Usually they don't have the heals. If you have 3 of them, the third person brings all the extra healing that you need and you won't run out. And
yes, exactly.
Covers up a lot of the weaknesses of that comp, and that has incredibly high damage output.
And then where you're weak in, let's say, the ults being not as good as the other support ults, everyone getting to res or half your team getting to self-res is kind of insane. That's like, that team up is worth another support ult as far as I'm concerned.
I really love that one. Also want to get out there the last trend I've only really seen in high MMR games, and that is an increase of melee characters. Obviously, Wolverine is super popular and everyone knows he's crazy good, but for some reason in the general community, Magic is extremely underrated to the majority of the player base, and I think that will change pretty quick. High MMR Magic players are disgusting creatures because they can brawl with tanks. If she pops ult and does a full charge right click into dash, she can one-shot Luna out of her own ults.
I think the reason why Magic's underrated right now is because of the high skill floor. You really need to learn the combos before she starts to look like an insane pick. But once you get the right click, ranged attack into close the distance, uppercut, and melee to finish, like sniping a character, now all of a sudden you're in their backline and you gain shields. I think Magic ultimately is the most reliable version of this archetype of character in this game. So you've got Iron Fist, Black Panther, Magic, and maybe I'm forgetting, maybe you could say Spider-Man or something. But out of all of them, she's the one that most reliably like plays the base game and they all can kind of go in and get a pick, and they do it in different ways. But Black Panther needs a very specific niche kind of scenario where he's getting focused, but then clutches back the fight. Pretty good with having a Luna Snowflake on him or something. But ultimately, Magic is just like applicable in more situations, I feel.
Or a Mantis. It's kind of nuts. And on top of that, outside of her ult, obviously she has the really nice combo, dude. Where she hits you with the uppercut and basically 100 to zeros you.
And this is Wolverine with 350 HP, guys.
or a Mantis. It's kind of nuts. And on top of that, outside of her ult, obviously she has the really nice combo where she hits you with the uppercut and basically 100 to zeros you. She can do everything. But you almost never hear about her because I think she has a bit of a learning curve. And so the general player base doesn't really run into him super often. But the interesting thing is, despite her having that learning curve, she has one of the highest win rates across all ranks last season and still does this season, as far as I know.
So I think that changed here. Wolverine and Storm have the highest ban rates. And funnily enough, Wolverine's win rate is only 50%, but he gets banned almost as much as anything else just because of how annoying he is and how transformative. That's kind of crazy to think. Like his win rate isn't even good. Like you can counter him. It's harder to counter Storm because of the raw stat output and the crazy ult. Wolverine takes more execution. It's kind of interesting to look at these stats because from the previous season, the pick rates were much more severe for the top picks. Now it's a bit more spread out. And going back to what Seagull had said earlier, we shouldn't balance the game on pick rates anyway. I think when you compare Magic to Black Panther, he can carry the game harder, but she's more consistent. So we might even anticipate that her win rate might be slightly higher just based on that.
Still does this season, as far as I know. The only thing to worry about with the future of this character is that team-ups will eventually change, and she is a character that relies on breakpoints for her combos, right? Her team-up right now is 15% damage boost, so I don't know if that's, let's say that gets changed at some other season down the line, they redo team-ups. Will that change the nature of the character in some regard, or change some of her breakpoints? Maybe she'll be a lot worse. I don't know. But if you're looking for a really high skill cap character that can really go to the highest ends of the ladder, I would pick Magic. I'm only partially biased here because Magic's one of my favorite characters in the game. If you got this far, I wanted to say I made this video because I feel that these live service PvP games evolve so much over time that it can be difficult to remember the state of the game in previous patches or iterations, or even to determine how it evolved in the first place. And I think this meta report format can serve as a useful glimpse to a specific part of a game's lifespan. I don't know how many I'll do, but it was like a history thing I wanted to put out there. So thanks for watching.
Seagull, you're the GOAT, bro. Do it every day. Do it every week. We want to see more of it. I think to his final point here about Magic, a good thing to remember is that she has some of the attributes that also is shared with Thor, where because she gains shields, a little bit more tanky, and a burst combo, just a bit more mobility. And if your team needs a squishy to do that same job, then picking Magic's pretty good as well. You can get around a little bit better, but I think more mechanics are required than to play Thor. So anyway, triple support meta is not so much of a thing, but just a bit easy to play. I think a lot of people are coming from the Overwatch community saying the new Squid Game season line, we've played these games before because we know how to sustain and kind of work together, and maybe to some degree Overwatch players are ruining Marvel Rivals, knowing how to cycle those cooldowns and really hold space and maximize a brawly comp. Here at the end of the video, I am going to suggest my sleeper pick for you guys, and I'm going to make a video about her as well. The top tier streamers will never mention this hero's name. It's one of those characters that nobody respects, and I'll even probably get trash talked for even suggesting this character isn't F tier, but Scarlet Witch is low-key a great pub stomper character for the super sustainy type characters in the game. I'll make a video breaking down how to play her, but because she's so durable in her own right, if something's out of position, you can fight and punish that, which is often the case in any ranked game outside of the top 0.1%. And then on top of that, when both teams are spamming the support ults that sustain you forever, she also has another ult that probably won't get nerfed, like Moon Knight's ult probably is going to go away. The Scarlet Witch ult is so known to be counterable, she's going to be flying under the radar a little bit, and she also can play in the safety of your team and then zone out the enemy support ults from doing anything, because they pop Invisible Woman, they pop Luna, and they expect to just be able to brawl you out. Well, you pop your Scarlet Witch ult, as long as you don't die inside of it, which maybe you're in your own support ult or play with your tank or whatever, then you can actually get a kill quite easily in that. Not as reliably as the point and click of the Groot Moon Knight combo, but pretty darn good in its own right. And I'll make a video breaking that down with gameplay. I will make my own content eventually, but I like reacting. It's cool, you know, it contribute to the conversation of the community. If you liked the video, please be sure to leave the video with a like, and don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss our new content from Frito from